All right, it's time to catch up with our guy, Isaac Trotter, 24/7 Sports national college basketball writer. Just put out a 100 things, I think, story about college basketball. That's how much he watches. How much fun is this, Isaac, getting to watch all this college basketball?
Yeah, it's super fun. I feel like this is the best time of the year, and I'm starting to get a good feel for a lot of teams. But now we have like all these preseason priors that we have to readjust a little bit to as we get new information. Transfers playing now with the two-time transfers now allowed to play, so everything's different, but it's awesome. It's a really really fun job.
Yeah, I want to dive into the Big Ten, what you think of that outlook, if anybody can push Purdue, and I want to get your thoughts on the national landscape as well. But let's focus, of course, first on Illinois. How much are you buying Illinois right now at 9-2, heading into their non-conference finale?
Yeah, I feel really good about this team, especially defensively. I think the process defensively has been really sound. Illinois so far this year has allowed the second most mid-range jumpers. They're doing what they do best. They take away threes, they take away good shots at the rim, and they force you to beat them with a lot of tough twos. And I remember when Kofi Cockburn left, everyone's like, well, they're going to play different defensively. We'll get to do all these different things. They're doing a lot of the same things defensively and having a lot of success. And when you have a defense like this to go along with an offensive maestro and Terrence Shannon and all of these old veterans that just work together in a really, really good piece and kind of good puzzle, I think it's a really good combination. I think, too, the body language with this team is noticeable. This is a team that seems to play like they like each other, and that's a big step in the right direction. And the passing, the playmaking, the connectiveness, the defense, the length, like it all just kind of works. And so far, so good for this Illinois team. And I think early in the year, I was a little skeptical about how high the ceiling was. And I think the ceiling or the arrow for this team has completely changed where, you talk about them as a top 10 team in the country. You talk about them as a legit contender with Purdue. And I think it's all warranted, even if Purdue might have done a little bit more so far this year.
Terrence Shannon, how many, if you were drafting guards in the country right now, what pick is Terrence Shannon?
Yeah, I think he's the first guard that goes off the board. And that's saying something because there's a lot of really good players. The Big Ten has the best two players in the country, in my opinion. And that's kind of crazy with how it's been so far this year. But Zach Edey's been awesome. Terrence Shannon has been the second best player in the country. And then you're talking about guards. It's Tyler Kolek. It's Isaiah Stevens, who Illinois fans probably know a little bit about with that flirtation about a potential transfer portal entry. Those are the type of guys there. Kevin McCullough's had a fantastic year. David Jones, another familiar name, has had a fantastic year, but Terrence Shannon has been right up there near the top, leading the country in transition points per game. The ability that he has to make better decisions this year on the fly, like quick decisions on the fly that are correct, feels like the biggest game changer for me because everything about his game, like he makes it look easy, but he's now making the tough decisions look easy as well. And so I think the assist rate doesn't necessarily represent how well he's playing. And, Illinois' point guard issues is a thing, but like Terrence Shannon Jr. is making a lot of those big decisions for them. And when you have a fifth-year senior like this who's playing at an All-American level, who could score at the rim, could score from three, we've seen what he can do when he gets to the free throw line and in the open floor. Yesterday, I went through and looked at all of his and ones. Like, it's just absurd. Like, I think he has 12 and ones so far this year. Like he just barrels through people. He is a cheat code. It just looks differently because he's not 7'4" and 300 pounds like Zach Edey.
Yeah, the decision making, the skill has improved. That is for certain. But the consistent assertiveness for me is what I love to see because you saw these glimpses of all this talent last year. But I kept being like, man, does he know he's the best player on the court? Does he know he's this team's leader? And he's doing that now. And man, I didn't know if he could. A 23, 24-year-old would be a first-round draft pick if he could improve his stock that much. But in a bad draft, Isaac, I think he's setting himself up pretty well.
He is. And you look at Jaime Jaquez and what Jaime Jaquez did for UCLA last year. He's like one of my favorite players in college basketball, maybe ever since I've been watching college basketball. What he can do, every little part of his game, he's so good at it. He's just a great defender. He was really good at creation. He could post up guys. He can catch and shoot threes. He could defend 5 positions. He could defend 3 positions, really elite. He kind of played point guard, right, for UCLA last year. And now you see what he's doing with the Miami Heat. I think he was the 18th or 19th pick of the draft, and just the ability to come in and impact the team in a lot of ways. And they've entrusted him in a lot of ways. What Jaime Jaquez was to UCLA last year is a lot of what Terrence Shannon is to Illinois this year, of just he makes everything work. And when you have that alpha like that, it makes everyone else's job so much easier. But I think it also is translatable to the next level. Like, yeah, he might not have one thing he's like super, super special at. And I think Terrence has a couple of those special traits, but he just helps in so many different areas of his game right now. And, you look at those NBA mock drafts, and I'm not an NBA mock draft expert. I'll leave that to other people, but the tape is really, really good for Terrence Shannon right now. And I think he's answered a lot of the questions that he, was given in Chicago when he was there at the NBA Combine.
I think you're feeling better about his supporting cast too, right? After the last couple of games, Coleman coming back and making a more consistent offensive impact. Quincy Guerrier just taking off here, and Marcus Domask. I know the one game against Florida Atlantic is a little bit of an outlier, but he's scored double digits 4 of his last 5 here. So I'll throw this to you. This is kind of a good thing for Illinois, not knowing the answer. Who is the second most likely all Big Ten player that Illinois has right now behind Shannon?
Yeah, I think it should be Coleman Hawkins, but I think it's probably going to be Marcus Domask. That's kind of my answer for that. Coleman Hawkins defensively so far this year, Illinois has been way better with him on the floor. One thing I look at too is the turnover rate that Illinois causes. They're at about a 16% turnover rate when Coleman Hawkins is on the floor defensively. It's only 11% when he's off the floor. So you're able to do a whole lot more when Coleman's on the floor defensively. I think he causes a lot of havoc. And, last year it felt like Coleman had his hair on fire defensively, trying to cover up gaps. Oh, we missed this. Like, we got something wrong. Oh, someone got back cut. Oh, a switch got busted. And he feels like way more he feels way more comfortable this year defensively. He can kind of just be himself. And I think that the Big Ten is going to give him a lot of opportunities for him to showcase his game as a stretch 5 against some really advantageous matchups. And defensively, I think he's probably their second best defender, or probably their best interior defender, but maybe their second best defender overall. And so he should probably be their second best player. But I think Domask also is going to have some nights where, he might not get 33, but I think he's going to have some nights where he leads his team in scoring. And that's going to play in Big Ten play. And I think their ability to find the right mismatch for Domask to hunt is going to be very fascinating, because you look through this Big Ten and, Indiana has some small guards that you can go after. When Xavier Johnson's healthy, you can go after him. Iowa, you can go after a lot of guys in that Iowa rotation. Maryland, you got some freshmen that Marcus Domask is going to put on an island. Michigan, every time you play Michigan, Doug McDaniel has to be the guy that you go after. So I can go up and down these rosters. Like, Domask is going to have a night, pretty often during Big Ten play where he's going to have a really good advantage and he's going to be able to go to work. So it's a good problem to have when you have a bunch of different guys that you could potentially have as all Big Ten guys. But, it's also that one thing where it's like, last year we had a lot of people not really buying in on Purdue's supporting cast because Zach Edey made everybody's life so much easier. I wonder if we're going to have a similar conversation with Illinois supporting cast, because, like, man, that Terrence Shannon guy is really, really good, and he makes everything so much easier.
Well, Isaac, what do you make of Brad Underwood's impact on all of this? Whether it's his off season, the scheming, as you said, they've changed it up to where our offense is pretty simple. Find the mismatch, get it, and then attack it. What have you made of Brad Underwood coaching this team through 11 games?
Yeah, it's funny. You kind of think about, remember when Brad Underwood brought up that Boston Celtics, hey, we're going to be like the Boston Celtics, and everyone's kind of cringed at it a little bit. Like, what Illinois is doing right now is a lot of NBA-ish like that's kind of what the NBA game is find the mismatch and attack it in certain matchups, and what buttons can you press. And so far this year, it's kind of nice to finish bragging rights and not have to do a huge schematic adjustment, right? Like, you don't have to change everything about what you do. And I think that's a credit to this staff of being ready. I think it's also goes into the roster construction too, of building a roster that has a lot higher floor and doesn't necessarily need these monster tweaks. And I think Mike LaTulip brought up a really good point. I think yesterday on your podcast, or maybe a couple days before, where this offense has changed a little bit. When they were doing a lot of split actions earlier in the season, now they're kind of finding more of the mismatches, doing a lot more post-ups. They still have that though in their bag. They can do a lot of different things. And I think Brad Underwood deserves a ton of credit. I think he'd probably be on the inside track for Big Ten Coach of the Year with this group so far, with how he's helped this group, outplay preseason expectations. And, I think he's also put a lot of trust into his staff. And I think we'd be remiss not to bring up Tyler Underwood's impact on this group. I think he's done a really nice job. As if you watch the games, he's the one putting all the signals in for their offense. So I don't necessarily want to call him the offensive coordinator until Brad Underwood says that, but he's kind of engineering a lot of that right now. And I think this offense looks very connected and very, very steady. Like, I feel like you know what this group is going to be. And that's even with a team. I mean, they're only shooting 32% on catch and shoot threes. It's not like they're monstrably like so much better shooting the ball from downtown, but they're just getting and creating a lot better looks. So I think Tyler Underwood and Brad Underwood deserve a little bit of credit for that.
All right, let's pour a little cold water on this, right? I mean, feeling good, but what concerns you over a 19-game Big Ten slate starting next week?
Yeah, I still have some concerns about what this group looks offensively without Coleman Hawkins on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dane Danger has had some moments where you've seen the good from him, but you've also seen the bad with the turnovers and the decision making. But I think Illinois' offensive rating without Coleman Hawkins, we got a big sample size of that too, because Coleman missed a few games. It's like 15 points per possession worse. So they're still a decent offensive team without Coleman Hawkins on the floor, but they're like awesome offensively when Coleman's in the game. And so those are some of those concerns that I have during a long Big Ten slate. Like, you're going to have injuries. You're going to have times where, you know, bad Coleman Hawkins games, because that's just what happens in the Big Ten. And this group, this league is so well scouted. So my concern is, like, what does this offense look like when, you know, Coleman's not on the floor? Like, how can you do some things differently? Like, do you, like, if Amani's not ready, if Dane is still being inconsistent, do you have times where you put Quincy Guerrier at the 5? Do you mess around with Ty Rodgers being more of that point forward decision maker from the high post area? So I think that there's a lot of like those unanswered questions about what this group looks like when you don't have your stretch 5 making threes, or when your stretch 5 is struggling to make shots. And that's when I feel like this group could run into some issues offensively, is if Coleman Hawkins isn't effective or making the right decisions or not on the floor. That's when it could get a little bit like, okay, now it's iso ball again. And we've seen that kind of go downhill in Big Ten play at times.
I feel like we might get our answer in a week when Illinois goes to Mackey, because Illinois got 2 games against Purdue, which is great for their resume. It's potentially great for the Big Ten race. But do you think Illinois can legitimately push Purdue in the Big Ten this year?
I do. I was looking at the schedule, right? So here we go. Penn State and Minnesota were the 2 teams that we thought would be the worst. Yeah. Illinois only gets them once. So you're like, okay, that's not necessarily great. Purdue only gets them once as well, though. So you're kind of on even ground with Purdue. And if you remember last year, that first half, Dane Danger played a ton against Purdue. The second half, when Illinois went on that huge run, that was kind of like the signature Coleman Hawkins at the 5 moment. We started to see a little bit of that. Yeah, that's right. Like, we started to see, it's like, oh, that proof of concept of Coleman at the 5 is huge. Now, I haven't talked to Brad Underwood about this. I haven't talked to any of the staff about this, but I wonder if that, like, in the back of their head, that like 20-minute scheme where Coleman at the 5 has really impacted their roster construction moving forward, and like doubling down on Coleman at the 5. And like, this is what we need to be, because that second half there against Purdue was when, I mean, Zach Edey struggled to finish over Coleman Hawkins. Coleman Hawkins gave them a lot of problems. So this matchup is going to be fantastic. Now, on the counter end, Illinois plays a lot of drop coverage, and Braden Smith this year has been a phenomenal drop coverage killer and has been coming off ball screens ready to go. I mean, his pull-up off the bounce dribble numbers are just phenomenal, and he's been terrific this year. Fletcher Lawyer can also do a lot of those similar things. Like, Illinois wants to bait you into taking those tough shots. Purdue's best 2 guards are making a ton of those tough shots at a high clip right now. So that's like the yin and yang with this group. Like, Purdue doesn't necessarily have like that high-end athleticism that Illinois has, but the skill level and the shot making that Purdue has, and Zach Edey, like, kind of helps. So this matchup is just fantastic. So to answer your question, I do think so. The schedule is pretty similar between Illinois and Purdue in Big Ten play. And this is going to be a gauntlet. I think Purdue at home I would be stunned if they lost a game at home this year. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And Illinois has to have that similar type of impact at the State Farm Center. You just can't lose home games in the Big Ten if you want to compete for a Big Ten title. What's that Sean Harrington thing? The +1, -1. I still think about that once in a while. Getting +1s on the road is huge.
This bustling holiday season, you might be looking for nutritious, flavorful meals to fuel you on jam-packed days. Well, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service, can help you eat well for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle while tackling all of your holiday to-dos. Treat yourself to high-quality, delicious meals over the holidays. Choose from 35-plus chef-crafted meals every week that support a healthy lifestyle and meet your meal preferences, whether it's calorie smart, vegan and veggie, protein plus, and more wholesome options. So cross meal prepping off your list this holiday season with Factor. Skip the meal planning, grocery shopping, chopping, prepping, and cleaning up, and get Factor's fresh, never frozen meals delivered to your door. They're ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Head to factormeals.com/Illini50 and use code Illini50 to get 50% off. That's code Illini50 at factormeals.com/Illini50 to get 50% off. Well, Purdue has the best resume so far in the country. They have the one loss to Northwestern. So Houston is undefeated still. But Purdue has the best wins in the country. They are on track to get a number 1 seed. Where do they rank among your national title favorites?
I mean, they're right there with everybody. You know, I've thought a lot about like this question of like, what's the best team, like the best version of a team that we've seen this year. And it's hard to argue that Purdue's best version isn't better than everybody else's. You know, when Edey's able to get to the line, when Edey's fouling out multiple guys in the opposing team's front court, when Braden Smith has really improved and Fletcher Lawyer's improved, it's really something special. And the other thing that's underrated about them is those 3 guys are so good, but they have so many different pieces that they can fit and put in the 4th spot or the 5th spot. Maybe it's a Lance Jones game. Maybe it's Miles Colvin. Maybe Mason Gillis is coming in, knock down, catch and shoot threes. Maybe Cam Heide is a redshirt freshman. Like Purdue's doing this thing again with redshirt freshmen where they just are able to come in and be really impactful. You know, Ethan Morton, I don't think he is an awesome Big Ten player, but they don't have to play him 27 minutes a night anymore. They can play him 8, or they can play him 10, or they can not play him at all. Like, and so like those are like the parts of this Purdue team, just the depth and the continuity. I think their continuity ranking on KenPom's like maybe top 2 or top 3 in the country, and it makes sense. They play like that. And so when you're looking at national title contenders, you know, Purdue has faced a gauntlet this year. I mean, their wins are absurd. Gonzaga, Xavier, Tennessee, Marquette, you know, Iowa at home is Alabama, Arizona. Like, right. Good Lord. Like, that's like an unbelievable stretch. Like, their stretch of games that they won at Maui might be tougher than the 3 games they could see in the NCAA tournament. So that's the type of level that they've been playing at. And, you know, if I think Purdue runs their program the right way, I think a lot of people would be really happy if Matt Painter went on a run in March, because it feels like he's been, you know, he kind of deserves a moment. And this team is really, really capable because their player development has been so good.
All right, Trotter, in your Big Ten rankings, you have Purdue 1, Illinois 2?
I do. Yeah, I think that it felt like Wisconsin was kind of on the doorstep of potentially making that a conversation with Illinois, but Wisconsin's lost to Arizona. Illinois goes on the road to Tennessee, puts up a fight, loses late. Wisconsin goes on the road to Arizona and gets their doors blown off. And so like that's kind of like how I separate those two. But I feel like there's a little tier gap between Illinois, Purdue, Illinois, and then the rest of the Big Ten, just because those 2 teams at the top, they have alphas, All-American alphas, and then an old supporting cast. It just makes a lot of sense. And not a lot of other teams in the Big Ten can kind of say that.
If you had to pick a team that could get in that tier, whether it's the top with Purdue and Illinois, or maybe that, you know, 1B with Illinois, who would it be? Who do you think would crack that?
It's Wisconsin, it's Ohio State, and Michigan State. Those are like the 3 teams that are starting to feel like they're playing a little bit better. Wisconsin's the beauty of Wisconsin is that like Connor Essegian has become like out of the rotation. It doesn't matter. Like they have a freshman that's come in, and John Blackwell, and he's been awesome for them this year, just making everything. Really good rebounder, good catch and shoot guy from 3. And like, so they can kind of afford to not have a season. Now, Chucky Hepburn got beat up and a little bit nicked up in their last game. So we'll see if he's back and ready to go for Tuesday for their opener against Iowa. So that'll be an interesting one to monitor. But like that team just makes a lot more sense. Stephen Crowell is playing the best basketball of his career. Tyler Wall looks a little bit healthy, although he still can't finish with his left hand, which I'm still frustrated by. And then AJ Storr has come in and started to really solidify himself as a go-to alpha. So when you have Chucky Hepburn as your second best player and Stephen Crowell as your third best player and Tyler Wall is like your fourth best player, I feel like that makes a lot more sense. So that's the team that I really like. Ohio State too. You know, it's a really young team. We've seen their youth on display with that loss to Penn State in the game they really controlled, but their schedule is really huge too. They just have one game against Illinois and Purdue, and they get 2 games against Minnesota and Penn State. So I think maybe like they got a little bit of a break there from the conference scheduling thing. Now they already lost once to Penn State, so they didn't take advantage of it. But that's one of those situations where they might have a little bit of softer conference slate that could put them in that mix.
So Purdue, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Ohio State. Assuming you think those 5 teams will make the tournament, do you feel safe about any other teams in the conference?
Not really, to be honest. It's been really, really frustrating because there's so many one-way teams. We talk so much about two-way guys. The Big Ten is filled with one-way teams. Northwestern they're very one-way right now. Like they have some moments defensively and it's boo-booey offensively, but they're really thin. Like Michigan is awesome offensively and atrocious defensively. Nebraska has some moments where you feel like the skill level isn't quite there. Indiana, I'm not sure they're good at anything right now. Like, so they've had a lot of those. There's a lot of those teams where it's like maybe they have one thing they're good at, but they don't have that second thing they're very good at. Maryland, right? Like great defensively, but just atrocious right now from an offensive standpoint. So it's one of those weird things where you don't want to put too much into preseason priors, but we've had a lot of evidence now. We're at 12, 13 games now for most of these teams. And the bubble for the Big Ten is not as deep as it used to be. You know, Northwestern, I think, would be on the right side of the bubble right now. You feel good about what Nebraska and Indiana could potentially get into the tournament. But I mean, this is not some Big Ten that I think could get 10 or 11 teams in the tournament. Like it feels like 5 right now is for sure, probably 6 or 7. And whether that's Northwestern, Nebraska, maybe Michigan can sneak into that. Like that's where that group feels, because some of the middle teams in the Big Ten have been really disappointing. Iowa has been really, really disappointing. That's a team that looks like they're in real trouble. And Rutgers is another team that looks like they're kind of geared up for next year when they have their star freshman coming in.
So who is the most disappointing team in the Big Ten for you so far? I got mine.
Yeah, I think the right answer is Iowa, to be honest. You know, this is a team that like they should be better, you know, and you look at some of what they've put together in the portal. You know, Ben Creaky out of Valpo is a really good get, but you know, Peyton Sanford, we kind of expected a little bit more from him. And you know, it's these veterans, right? Like I'm not worried about Creaky and Peyton Sanford. Those guys have been really, really solid, but it's the veterans coming back that have kind of left you a little bit wanting more. Like Patrick McCaffrey has had a pretty rough year. DeSante Bowen, up and down. You know, Josh Dix hasn't really had that breakout spot that we thought from. Tony Perkins is kind of up and down. And it's like you replace all of these All-Americans, and now it's starting to reach the point where it's like, now are our freshmen like the most competent guys on the roster? Like, are they the ones that actually care? And so it's like multiple times I'm watching Iowa, I'm like, does anybody want to play hard and like want to compete in these games? And so like those are the frustrating things when, you know, you get your doors blown off by Purdue on the road, you get your doors blown off by Iowa State on the road, you come home and you let Michigan beat you by 10. And so like those are the frustrating parts of this Iowa team. Like it feels like the young guys might have to start really taking the group by the bull by the horns, because this is an older team that doesn't necessarily play like it sometimes.
Yeah, for me, it's still Maryland. Like I know they just beat UCLA. That's not a great UCLA team. It's a very young UCLA team. They've won 4 straight, but Penn State in overtime at home, Nicholls State by 6 at home, and they've lost to Davidson. UAB got blown out by Villanova, lost double digits at Indiana. I thought that was a team that could be as good as Illinois. I thought that was a team that could be, you know, maybe where Wisconsin is right now. So I just feel there's too much talent for that team not to be good. And it just feels like something's off there. Like I was kind of buying into Kevin Willard, the whole thing. But they got plenty of time. The Big Ten's given plenty of chances to win. They can still make the tournament, but a team with Jameer Young, Julian Reese, Deshaun Harris-Smith, I know he struggled with Dante Scott. Like that's a lot of talent, man.
No, it totally is. That's, I think, probably the correct answer. Iowa's maybe more of a personal thing for me. Just watching them like makes me frustrated. But you're right. Like Maryland is right.
So good. Like I mean, Fran's been so good with that program, kind of overachieving over the last 5-6 years. That it's weird to see them drop potentially all the way to the bottom of the Big Ten.
It is. And the thing with Maryland too, like if you look at Bart Torvik, if you remove preseason priors, Maryland hasn't just been a disappointment. They've been the worst team in the Big Ten. Like they've been the worst team. And like, I picked them second to start the year. I thought I was like kind of being smart. Like I'm fading Michigan State, going to pick Maryland to be second in the league. And like, it just hasn't worked. And you're right. It's like when you have 3 guys that come back in Jameer Young, Julian Reese, and Dante Scott that are all playing very similar roles, and it's still a mess. That's really weird. And they've really experimented a lot with Jordan Geronimo playing on the floor with Reese and with Scott, and there's just not enough skill. And that's some of the things that have run into some issues. They can win rock fights and they can win games when Jameer Young has to go for 37. I mean, Jameer Young went for 37 points and you scored 69 as a team. Like that's a problem. That's a really, really big problem. And I just don't know if it's fixable yet unless, Jahari Long, Jamie Kaiser, or Deshaun Harris-Smith really start playing at a much different level. And maybe they can. Maybe Young can put this team on his back. We've seen Willard's a really good coach. We've seen him get teams to play better down the stretch. And we know they have a great home court advantage. But, you're right. This is a team that we thought could potentially compete for the league, and they've been the worst team through 12 games.
Do you have a sleeper team in the Big Ten? Somebody who will finish better than people expect?
Yeah, I still think Ohio State has been playing really, really well. That one game against Penn State sticks out as kind of an outlier, but that is a really, really good team. Dale Bonner has been the best guard off the bench in the Big Ten, so far this year. And then you add that to Bruce Thornton. Roddy Gale, I think, is a pro who can potentially stick in the league for a little bit. Jamison Battle is your third best player, so much better than Jamison Battle as your first best player. Mm-hmm. And then, again, Felix Okpara. Ohio State's defensive numbers phenomenal when he's on the floor, especially at the rim. So they have a really, really young team, but their sophomores don't play like sophomores. They're older guys. And so when you have all of those sophomores that played so much, it's like hard to call them sophomores because they've got so much experience. And I think that's a team that can definitely finish in the top 5 in the Big Ten. It's
probably the team that I'm like thinking ahead, like could be the team to beat next year. Like, I mean, Bruce Thornton comes back, Okpara comes back, Roddy Gale. Like, if all those guys come back, like that's a team that I look for. This could be the takeoff year. Then next year's the year where they're great, kind of like Ayo Dosunmu's sophomore year, or something like that.
Yeah, you took the comp out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was thinking of. And this is a group too that I think in the tournament they have a lot of the firepower to potentially win a couple games. Like, can this be a second weekend team? Absolutely, because those guards can really shoot it. Thornton, Gale, Battle, and Bonner all like upper 38% from 3 or over so far this year. So having that shot making, having that skilled size, and then they also, the sneaky underrated one was Evan Mahaffey out of Penn State, that freshman who, when you can play on the for a Micah Shrewsbury team as a freshman, that says a lot. He's kind of come in and he's not necessarily wowed you offensively, but defensively does a little bit of everything. He's going to be the guy that guards Terrence Shannon Jr. when Illinois plays Ohio State.
All right, you watch all this basketball to this point, Isaac. What is the team you are most confident is going to make the Final Four? This is an idiotic question answer, but we're 2 months into the season. Who do you feel best about once you get to the tournament?
Can I give you 3? Purdue, I think that's a really great team. I think UConn, a healthy UConn, has been just complete. They're a machine. They're a war machine right now. But Arizona is the team I keep going back to as like they just make a lot of sense together. And, when you have a backcourt of Caleb Love and then you throw in Kylan Boswell and Pella Larson, like that's a great starting backcourt. But I used a baseball comp with them. Like their 4th and 5th starters, KJ Lewis and Jaden Bradley, are so much better than everyone else's 4th and 5th starters. So they have those guards that they can bring off the bench are just phenomenal. Umar Ballo is awesome. Keshad Johnson's been one of the top 5 to 7 transfers in the country this year. So they went into the portal, got the right players for the right spots. Caleb Love's been great. Keshad Johnson's been great, and they can just play a lot of different ways. They can play big, they can play small. They have a load of guards. They have a ton of shot making, and Kylan Boswell has kind of had some iffy moments against high level teams this year. I think that's a little bit fluky, and if he can find that shooting stroke in March, boy, this team does not have many flaws. So I think they're built to win 4, 5, 6 games in the NCAA tournament.
I was high on Marquette early. Should I keep my Marquette stock?
You should. Yes, absolutely. That team's been one of my favorite watches so far this year. That's a really, really great team to watch. What they do, their culture, that's a really connected team. Like I've been up there. I saw them in person play a couple times. You just see how they interact with each other. The post-game pressers are fun with them. Like that's a really, really interesting group. And Kolek and Cam Jones have been phenomenal so far this year. But they're looking for that third guy. That's still the major question. Can it be David Joplin offensively? They've had had some injuries as well too, but Illinois fans saw that one up close and personal. That's a team that's played a great schedule so far this year, and they got a big one coming up in Big East play when they play Creighton on Saturday. But yeah, I have no doubts about that Marquette team. You get them in March, you get them any draw, and you're going to feel pretty good because you feel like you have the best point guard in the country.
So let me throw this at you. Of the three elite teams Illinois has played in the non-conference, Tennessee, Florida Atlantic, Marquette, like, who do you feel best about? Like FAU, that's an obviously great win that is holding up incredibly well. And Illinois showed it can compete with Tennessee and Marquette. But who do you feel best about those three teams?
Well, I love them all. Like all three of those teams are great. Like FAU, it feels like you need to punch them like 9 times to knock them out in a game. Like they are so resilient.
The Austin Powers, why won't you die? Yeah.
they just do not quit. Like they are just relentless. Tennessee is a team that, they can beat you in a bunch of different ways. Illinois got the best version of the Dalton Connect show, but they have a lot of other ways they've shown that they can beat NC State when Connect doesn't play in the second half. And they've won a lot of games in different ways. Marquette, we've seen as well. So I think all three of those teams are like no one would be stunned if all three of those teams are in the Final Four, like at all. Like those are really, really excellent teams. And from Illinois perspective, you feel like you're really battle tested because they're all a little bit different. Like Marquette and FAU kind of beat you with skill, and Tennessee can try to like beat you with like power and strength and athleticism and a star. Like, so you've seen a lot of different styles here, not necessarily Big Ten styles, so to speak, but you've seen a lot of different styles. Like if you're going into March and it's like, hey, it's a Sweet 16 game and here comes FAU and then here comes Marquette if you get the winner, like you're kind of prepared for stuff like that. And all three of those teams are battle tested and ready to go. Like I love all three of those teams. I think they're top 10 teams in the country, all three of them.
Do you feel, kind of getting off your point, like Underwood has kind of wanted to get away from the Big Ten style? Do you think that's going to pay off?
I think it has to. I think Illinois plays a little bit differently than a lot of other teams in the Big Ten, and that's a good thing. Illinois posts up a lot, but they do it differently. You can win with post-ups. There's nothing wrong with post-ups, but I think it's really kind of getting your roster to look more like an athletic SEC type of caliber roster that can play a little bit more on it every single day, different game in the conference or in the big dance, because this team is so big and so physical and so fast. Like they have so much power, and that's a little bit different from those Big Ten teams in the past. It kind of reminds me, not the exact same, but it kind of reminds me of those Michigan State, like just loaded with athleticism teams that are just going to punk you on the glass. And that type of stuff, like if you could rebound, if you can enforce your will, like that stuff really plays in the big dance. And especially when you're playing some of those, like, the Chattanoogas of the world, or those really good, like Indiana State this year, like you're going to have like those power that you could really instill on teams. And this team doesn't look like a Big Ten team. They look like an SEC team. They look like one of those Big 12 teams.
Yeah, no, you reminded me, like when Michigan State mid-teens would come in with Miles Bridges and Jaren Jackson Jr. and one great point guard, but all of these dudes, and I watch it Illinois now, and I'm like, that's what Illinois looks like. Illinois looks like a Michigan State roster of just these long NBA type athletes, two-way guys, a front court that's deep as heck. They're lacking that true point guard, but the Ty Rodgers, Amani Hansman, these are guys that Izzo would have gotten in years past. And then you had a Terrence Shannon who looks like a Miles Bridges. You have Quincy Guerrier who looks like an NBA big man. Coleman Hawkins looks like an NBA big man. Like Underwood has built a heck of a impressive roster of talent, of athleticism, and of size.
And I look at the guys who don't play. Like Amani Hansberry is a 6'8", 225, like really good recruit that probably would be playing a lot for a lot of teams. Dane Danger is a 6'9" skilled big man that would play for a ton of teams. Like
he's crushing it from Minnesota right now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like a 17-11 player right there. There's been a lot of talk about the whole freshman thing. Which is total BS, because if you look through the entire league, all the good teams aren't playing freshmen. Like very rarely are any freshmen playing. But like Dre Gibbs Lawhorn's a really talented, uber athletic player that, 5, 6, 7 years ago would probably be a starter for one of those John Gross teams. Like it's just, that's the type of roster that you've built. And it goes back to Coleman Hawkins coming back. I know Terrence coming back is huge and that was big, but Coleman Hawkins' decision at the last second to come in, I think was a little bit surprising for them, because they went out and got Quincy. They went out and had like this 4-man ready to go, and Coleman coming back made them kind of pivot of what they were going to decide to be. And it really gave them a little bit of like rags to riches approach of like, just we got so many bodies here that can play a lot of different ways, offensively and defensively.
Yeah. All right, Isaac Trotter, you're the best, man. Best basketball game you've seen so far this year? Is it the two that stick out are Marquette, Purdue, and Arizona, Florida Atlantic. I guess Purdue, Arizona be up there too.
Yes, those were the games. If you really want the nitty gritty one, Furman Tulane a couple weeks ago was insane game.
I love it.
Yeah, right. Here's the scoops of that game. Game-winning three, they thought was a game-winning three. 0.7 seconds left, put back on the clock from Furman. Long pass. What's it called? Tulane gets it, chucks up a three to potentially tie it. Gets fouled, hits all 3 free throws to force overtime, double overtime winner for Tulane. So that was a banger game. But you're right. FAU Arizona was probably my favorite game of the year.
It was great. As Trotter, you're the best, man.
Thanks for having me.